Welcome, everyone. I am Nancy Combs Morgan, a congregational life consultant serving both the Mid-America and the Southern regions. In a moment, I'll let my dear colleague, Reverend Phil Lund, introduce himself. Tonight, we're going to be exploring Circle Process, a virtual way to connect thoughtfully and to be intentional in making sure that we are using this time of challenge to still deepen our spirits and to have lots of ways that we can connect with good intentionality. I want to make sure that you understand on this Zoom room that we are recording. So if you would like to minimize your screen, that is your choice. And if you have any questions about using Zoom, you are welcome to put those in the chat. I have an opening reading and then I will turn it over to Phil. But Phil, why don't you first introduce yourself?
Certainly. Yes, I'm Phil Lund. I'm a congregational life consultant for the Mid-America region, alone, not the Southern region as well. And this is, I think, as Nancy said, some important stuff we've been working on that hopefully will help us be able to have more intentional online meetings when we do our online meetings. And also, these can be things that can carry over when we can start to meet face to face again too. The processes that we're going to talk about can really go a long way towards bringing us closer together, whether it's online or in real life. So.
I want to acknowledge before our opening reading that we have a wide diversity of participants this evening, which makes my heart very full. We truly are multi-generational. We have invited youth leaders who are active at a congregational level, as well as leaders who serve at our Youth Midwest Leadership School. I'd like to acknowledge Molly Carney, if you would just wave, who serves on faculty from Elliott Chapel at our Youth Leadership School. Scott Stewart, if you would wave, our Dean of our Youth Midwest Leadership School. Just had to give those little shout outs. There's a lot more. We have ministers, we have membership directors. There's just a wide diversity, and thank you so much for taking time this evening. So let us start as we mean to continue by having a centering. And hold on just one moment. I think this really is so wonderful. I'm going to share screen so you can see. This comes from the resources on the UUA site from Equal Access, which is really important in this time to consider accessibility issues. This is not just for when we are face-to-face, but also to be thinking about virtually. You can find this, and I have the link actually as a part of the reading. And the reading is called Patience. When we are overwhelmed with the world and cannot see our way clear, when life seems a struggle between tedium and apathy, or frenzy and exhaustion, when today seems a punishment and tomorrow a torment, may we find the courage of patience. May we recognize courage in ourselves and our companions, which is not dramatic, that elicits no fanfare, that commands little notice by the world, that is forgotten and taken for granted. May we learn how to cope. Like those who live one day of pain at a time, who see the long path of suffering and do not despair. Amen. By Reverend Bonnie Vigard. And now I'll turn it over to Phil.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, I'm going to just jump right in. I've got a slide presentation for you all, and I'm going to make that happen. My portion of our presentation tonight, I've been calling Structuring Small Group Process Online and in Real Life. And I just want to share with you what some of the structures are that go into making a process, and the process we're going to be talking about is Circle Process, but it's built out of structures, and that's kind of like a big learning I've had over the last few months as I've been exploring this more and more. So I learned about these two important structures that I want to talk to you about a few years ago when I was in Boston at the UUA headquarters with my colleagues, Nancy and a lot of other folks from the Congregational Life staff group for our annual gathering. We would gather once a year we were doing it in January for a while. We're doing it in December, and it's actually called BAM, and it's called the Big Alignment Meeting for some reason. I won't go into that, but we call it BAM. So we were in Boston at the headquarters for our BAM, and normally when we're there, there's always some sort of session, some sort of sessions that are around learning that's supposed to help us make do our work better, to help us do our work better. And this particular year, the sessions were led by a group called Essential Partners. As you can see, their slogan is Bold Explorations in Community. And this is a group that equips people to live and work better together in community by building trust and understanding across differences. And I have to tell you the truth, I usually don't save the handouts we get from these things. You know, they'll often give us just piles and piles of handouts, and I usually don't save them, but I saved this one, A Taste of Dialogue, because I was so impressed with the process that it outlined, is particularly something they called structured go-rounds. And at the heart of structured go-rounds, there are 3 simple movements. A question is presented, followed by 2 minutes of silence. And then one person speaks for 2 minutes, and that person is followed by the person on their left, with the understanding that passing or passing for now is always acceptable. And there is a pause between speakers so that what was spoken can be fully heard and absorbed. And, you know, this process kind of makes sense, but I really hadn't seen a group kind of just lay it out and say, this is the way we do things. We always do things this way. And I thought, well, that's great for several reasons, of course. And one of the biggest ones is it gives everybody a chance to talk. It gives people who might be a little bit more introverted space to talk. It also holds off perhaps the people who are always the first to talk. They have to wait their turn until they can talk. So it just kind of really changes up the whole process. And Essential Partners says that these 2 structures, the go-round and the pause, work so well that they've lifted them up as their favored structures in how they do their work. And here's what they have to say about it, structures. They say the structure of a meeting is defined by a sequence of time segments, each associated with certain purposes and or activities. A period of time when only one person may speak is a structure. A time for questions is a structure. A time to reflect in silence is a structure. And even a less structured conversation is also a structure. So these are all structures. And here is how they work in a structured format. So in their field guide to community dialogue and design facilitation, this is what they say, using how they say they use the structured go-arounds and pauses and what they do for people. It supports people in speaking, listening, and reflecting in new ways. And that's one of the things that really grabbed me about this, is this makes space for people to speak, listen, and reflect in new ways. It blocks old patterns, creating space for new ways of being together. It lowers anxiety, which increases learning and openness, and it blocks reactivity, which encourages thoughtful speaking and careful listening. And that thoughtful speaking and careful listening, I think those are really just essential elements of any group process where we're really trying to go deeper than we would say at coffee hour or something like that. So in the 8 years since then, that meeting, and I think it was about, well, not 8 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. In the years since that meeting, I've learned that these 3 elements, the go around and the pause, they're fundamental parts of what is generically known as circle process. And this has been refined in a number of books over the years, like Wisdom Circles, that's from like 1998. The Little Book of Circle Processes, I think that's like 2005 or something like that. And The Circle Way, which is a more recent book, 2015 or something along those lines. And each of these different approaches have their own sort of ways of how these structures work. how they can be used to achieve a particular end. And they're slightly different, but they also have a lot of commonalities to them. And these commonalities, I think, are the ones that we really want to lift up, because for me, they really just kind of, they make the structure very, very doable for people, and also very, let's see, generative. They open things up for us. So the difference between what can happen in other structures and or other processes and what happens in circle processes is, in other processes, usually the facilitator directs the dialogue, particularly in the early stages. So somebody does what we're doing right now, is they're facilitating this and they're laying out a lot of information and they're talking about what we're going to do. But in circle processes, the structured go around regulates the dialogue. Once we have these structures, that's what kind of carries us along. In other processes, there isn't necessarily an explicit discussion of dialogues, but there is values, but there is an explicit discussion of values before discussing the issues in circle process. In other kind of processes, the facilitator provides ground rules and asks the group for additions. They kind of say, here's how we're going to be together, and does anybody want to add anything to that? But in circle process, the group is responsible for creating the guidelines. In other processes, they usually go directly to the participants to identify the issues. So, what is it we need to talk about? What are we going to be doing today? In circle process, you don't jump right to the issues. You spend some time together doing some other things before we get into the issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those things are like. In other processes, there may be little or no use in ceremony, but in circle process, there's a deliberate marking of the space as a space apart through opening and closing ceremony. And here's one of the most important things. In other processes, the facilitator usually doesn't participate as a stakeholder, but in circle process, the facilitator is also a participant. And I think that's a really big difference there. So 3 of these commonalities among the different takes on circle processes, I think are especially helpful for building trust and understanding in a group. And that would be the explicit discussion of values, the group creation of guidelines, and the use of ceremony. I think these are really kind of essential elements of a circle process, or actually these are really structures, as I said before. These are structures that we're using within the process. So the circle part of the circle process really just describes how participants in the group are arranged, because the circle is the easiest way to facilitate a structured go-round moving in a clockwise direction. So circle process practitioners also emphasize the importance of the circle's center as well, because it allows participants to speak from their center to the center of the circle. So the center becomes a very important thing in circle process as well. Okay, so when we're engaged in real life, in face-to-face gatherings, there are things we can do to set the tone for circle process. We can arrange the chairs in a very visible way. This is from when I did a ministerial startup in Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota. I asked permission. I didn't tell them what I was going to do, but I asked permission if we could try this out in a circle. And they said yes, and we did, and it was a wonderful experience. And also when I said we have a center, you can physically build a center that's aesthetically pleasing and has some symbolic objects. And so you can make it that set aside the space by using these sort of cues. But how do we do that when we're online, when this is how we interact with each other, with computers or phones or tablets, and when this is how we look, people call it the Hollywood squares. setup, right? I mean, this really has nothing to do with the circle. How do we turn that in to a circle? And that's something I really want to emphasize tonight. But whether it's online or in a circle process, what really works best is to tailor the elements that you're using to the group that you're doing the circle with. And for us, that's Unitarian Universalism. And I mentioned values before. And so when I talk about values in circle process, I like to bring in our UU values, believing in the worthiness of every person, showing compassion and fairness, accepting others for who they are, growing through a personal search for truth, leading with democratic spirit, working for justice, understanding that everything is interconnected. And when I do that, Nancy knows this too, because she's been in a couple of circles that I've done. I like to make room for people to bring their own values and put them into the center of the circle as well. And so we're really starting off with our values then, both the values of our whole group and also the individual values, all right? And then I mentioned earlier about the guidelines, that taste of dialogue document I showed you, they called them agreements. And, you know, we all have some agreements, I think, that we usually use when we're in group process, things like you can always pass or pass for now, you respect the time limits, we speak one at a time and we share airspace. We keep things confidential. You know, the learning goes with you, but the stories stay here. And we ask for people to speak for themselves and not on behalf of others. But one of the ways I like to make this idea of guidelines or agreements fit more with our tradition is to think of them in terms of covenant. And covenant is this is one of the best definitions I've seen from Walter Hertz. Covenants are the common understandings, agreements, and promises made one to another that define our mutual obligations and commitments to each other as we try to live our faith and vision. And Nancy and I were talking about covenants, and I shared this document with her from Jenica Davis Hockett. By the way, speaking of documents, I have a Google site that we're going to give you the link to. And on that Google site, there are really there's a document for almost everything that I'm talking about here. And this one comes from Jenica Davis Hockett, and it's part of the Tapestry of Faith curriculum. But Jenica talks about three different models for covenanting. She says there's the scaffold model, which is add, change, and rearrange. And this is really that facilitator provides ground rules and asks the group for additions model that is often found in non-circle type meetings, but it can really still function for circles process. And it works best when a group of people has never covenanted before and needs a lot of guidance. So people who've never heard of the idea of covenanting, they are going to need to, you know, have a sense of what it is and laid out for them, or a group that has a very short amount of time to build a covenant. So if we're talking about a group that's only going to meet for one time, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that covenant process. So you really do need to start with the facilitator for providing some ground rules and then having those additions coming from the participants. But these next two models I'm going to talk about, these are more in keeping with that communal sharing of responsibility for the creation of guidelines. And so the first of these two is the brainstorm model, from nothing to something. And that's where the facilitator leads the group through the brainstorming process. And this works best for a group that has a luxury of time. So if you were going to be doing an all day event, maybe rather than just a couple hours or a morning or afternoon, you might have the time to start from scratch with the brainstorm model. A group that is a size that allows every voice to be heard. So it can't be a huge group, but a group that's of the right size can do this. And a group that would benefit from going through this process as a community building exercise. And so that's one of the things I like about this too. If you're thinking of ways to build community, the actual coming up with your covenant can be a way to build community. And then the last model that Jenica talks about is the from many to one model. And this is where each person writes down a few key points they would like to see included in the group covenant. And in real life, you could do this with index cards or whatever. But online, you could use the chat box on your platform, or you could even do the whiteboard. Sometimes there's a whiteboard portion where somebody can actually write things down and everybody would see them. And that model works best for a group that where some people are dominant speakers and others' voices go unheard, a very large group, and or a group that has difficulty coming to agreement. So as I said, for groups that only meet once, that scaffold model may be the best given the time constraints, but groups that plan to meet more than once, like covenant groups or spiritual direction groups, you'll want to take the time to do the brainstorm or many to one models. So I skipped ahead here to the ceremony screen, but that's the third thing that I mentioned, the values, the covenant, and then the ceremony. These are ways that we can ground our group process in the UU tradition. So this is an opportunity for us to use opening and closing in words and hymns and songs from some of our hymnals, or perhaps from Worship Web. And we can also use lighting a chalice and extinguishing a chalice. And with circle process, it's also helpful to have a bell or chime available to signal the opening of the circle and the closing of the circle. Also, a bell or a chime is great for setting off the pauses that happen throughout the process. And that makes it more of a ceremony as well. So these are ways that we can put this all together in a more intentional way using ritual and ceremony. Now, there are a few special considerations for using circle groups online. And what I usually ask people to do when we're doing the go rounds, when you're really listening to one person at a time, is to use the speaker view, not the gallery view, so that you can actually see the person who's talking and not the Hollywood Squares model. And then of course to mute yourselves so you're not going to interrupt them or have any sort of noises, the cat meowing or the dog barking or whatever it is. And then also finally, to not use the chat. And I've been in meetings where, you know, I might be talking and I'm seeing stuff is going on in the chat. And if we were in real life, that would be the equivalent of people whispering to each other while you're, you know, trying to talk, and that's just distracting. We want to really pay attention to the person. We want to be attentive listeners. And when it's our turn, we want to be intentional speakers. And this is what allows us to do that online. So now here's the part I've really been kind of all over lately, is taking advantage of what we have online to do dyads. And that I see using breakout rooms to pair people up so that they can talk to each other in like the smallest group you can possibly have, a dyad. And what I like to do is over the course of a meeting is try to get people talking to the person who would be to the left of them and to the right of them. And in this case, I would assign the seating order, and then I would know who I have sitting next to each other. And this would be the order we would follow when we go in the circle as well. And what I like about doing the dyads is, for me, it kind of is what is the foundation of the circle. It's really what brings us together in these kind of discrete little elements of like Nancy and Sharon and David and Nancy and Cameron and David and Andrew, all together that brings us into a group that is getting to know each other better. And this can be a group that's been working together forever, depending on the questions you're asking. You're going to find out perhaps some new things about people that you may have known for a long time. And when we go deeper with each other individually, that's going to allow us all to go deeper together in the group.
Phil, may I chime in about dyads? Do you mind if I chime in?
Yeah,
so
please.
The beauty of this, and everybody just, anytime anyone has seen this graphic that Phil came up with, this is just entrancing of just the idea and the importance. So if you are in a multi-generational circle, if you're in a circle with youth and adults, we have some suggested guidelines, because I know that there are DREs and youth coordinators and leaders here who work with youth. We have come up with some virtual guidelines, which I will be sending out to all of the participants who are interested in those, but in particular around dyads, because you have asked youth to register before anything like this. So it's not just a drop-in kind of situation. You actually know the youth, and on that registration form, they have a sponsoring adult, similar to going to like a face-to-face event. Now, with the dyads, it doesn't necessarily always have to have an adult with a youth, okay? Because you've already cleared and you already know that it's a safe virtual community. So I just wanted to chime in
Sure.
about that, but I will be talking a little bit more in my portion about some of that virtual youth ministry piece.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And this is why I used as our example our own staff group here. We all know each other. If we were in a real live retreat, we would have opportunities to talk one-on-one throughout the whole thing. A church board where you're all members and know each other. A group that's made to a commitment to be together over time. And actually commitment is something that we want when we do with Circle Process. We want people who are really committed to the process too. But thank you, Nancy, for that. So once, I've done the dyads and, you might just give them a simple question to talk about in the dyads. A good question to get to know each other right off the bat, I think our questions are like, tell me about your name and what name you like to be called by and why that's important to you, you'll notice like I'm Phil here in my little picture here, but Andrew is Andrew and David is David, so people they like to be called different things. And it's always interesting to find out why people do that. So you give a question like that early on for people just to get to know each other a little better. And this is what helps create that space for new ways of being together and lowering anxiety and increasing openness, encouraging that careful listening and thoughtful speaking. And so now the group is ready to do the structured grow rounds, and that's where one person at a time actually speaks, and we would go in the order that we have virtually laid out. And we've done this a couple times now, Nancy. We've actually done a couple retreats over the last 2 weeks, and our facilitators have said, this is the order we're going to go in every time we speak during this retreat. And that way, you know that you're coming up, like, Andrew knows that he's going to come up now because I've just spoken. And so that's the way we do that. And that's one of the best things about Circle Process is it takes away the anxiety of wondering, when's somebody going to start speaking or who's next, or, should I say something now? When you're supposed to speak, who's going to be speaking next. So to keep that in the virtual world, to keep it online, I think is really important. Now, if you're going to have more than one meeting, I think what's cool is you can change the seating order then by having people now talk with people that they didn't talk to the first time. So I could see like having a board retreat virtually that might start on a Friday night and have a couple sessions on Saturday. And every time you got together, you could do one of these, a couple of these dyad exercises. And it's kind of like a round robin tournament, but rather than each individual getting the opportunity to compete with all the other individuals in turn, the goal is to give everybody the opportunity to build a closer relationship with everybody else in turn.
And so further,
yeah, sure.
Phil, there's a question about the dyad and breakout from Joetta. She's just asking that you talk more about using the breakout rooms for those dyad discussions. Now, Joetta, do you mean the reasoning behind or the technical piece of that? You can unmute if you like.
I was actually talking on the technical side.
Yeah, sure.
But maybe I just need to watch a Zoom webinar for that.
Well,
I haven't actually used breakout rooms.
Right. No, I hadn't either. When you first host it, if you've never hosted one before, you don't know what's behind the scenes with it. But you get a screen when you're ready to do breakout rooms. You get a screen, and it asks you how big you want the groups to be. So you want to be 3 or 4 people or 2 or 3 people. And then the Zoom will automatically assign people to those rooms. And actually, if we have time, we're going to do a little breakout room here, and we're going to do it randomly like that. but you can also set the rooms ahead of time. So as part of being intentional for a meeting, I would know who was going to be there, and I would decide what the breakout rooms were going to be ahead of time, and I might even set them up ahead of time. So you have that capability with Zoom to do that. But good question. So so every time you meet, if you're going to be like we're doing, what is it, Nancy, 5 sessions for our retreat? We're going all the way into June doing them. We're doing like 1 a month or 1 or 2 a month. Oh, we're going into July, aren't we? I think we are. Yeah. So we're doing 1 or 2 a month, and that gives us an opportunity to do this rearranging every time and to spend some time together. And what I'm trying to replicate here is what might happen if we were in real life together. We go down to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, and David's there, so I talk to David for a while, and then with my coffee on the way back, I run into Andrew and I talk to Andrew for a while. And that's part of how we build community. So what I'm trying to do here is to encourage us to use these platforms, to use whatever capabilities they have, and really try to use them in service of building community. And that community is what allows us, like I said, to go deeper and to really build relationships in ways that are meaningful, and to help us have them better group process overall. So I envision another thing that I've learned about groups like this when we're meeting over time is you can go deeper with questions as you move along. So like that first time you meet, you might have some casual questions to get to know someone. Like the question I said, talk about what name you like to be called by and why that name's important to you. So you can have casual questions, and then you can move on to somewhat personal questions to get to know people, get better. And here's one that I think's somewhat personal. It's like, the question is, what challenging thing are you working on these days? So that wouldn't be a good question like the first time you met somebody or got to know somebody. But if you've been meeting for a few times, you can go a little deeper with them and talk about something like that. And then you can go to those even more personal questions where you really can get to know someone better. And I'm thinking of questions like, what gives your life meaning, or even what keeps you up at night? So once you've gotten to know someone better, you have that opportunity to go deeper. And I think that's what really makes the group cohere. And I think that's what gives us an opportunity to have some really good group process. And I think the circle process is exactly the process we need to do that. There. So Nancy, that's what I have about just kind of the basics of the structured go-rounds, using the pauses, using the values and the covenant and the ceremony, and then those dyads to really just start to bring us together. And I think, obviously this would work so well face-to-face, but I think there's just really huge potential to be able to use this stuff online for lots of different things. Nancy's going to talk about some of those things, but the ones I would like to emphasize, you can use this for decision-making process. You could use it for governance. You can use it for spiritual direction. It's a way to organize small group ministry. You can do conflict engagement this way. And, there's really almost everything that we do in a congregation. If we wanted to, we can bring this kind of intentionality to it. So that's my little run through the structures and processes of circle.
So I'm going to take us to a multi-generational lens, because I am a person who has a passion for Unitarian Universalist faith development. And as we talk about circle process and anything we talk about, all of that is faith development. So it's important that we weave this in. Now, some of you may be here thinking, well, gosh, I know much of this. I've been leading covenant group circles. I've been leading youth group circles. Some folks here I know who've served on our Youth Midwest Leadership School have been leading Credo group circles, which are deep value-centered reflections that are guided. So you're thinking, I've kind of gotten all this down, but there's something different tonight, for we're actually inviting you to think about the way to do this virtually. That's a key distinction. The other piece is that often when we have gone into a circle, it feels like a warm, fuzzy thing. We're in a circle, we're all facing each other. There's equity in the design. Everyone is encouraged to speak because we're all looking at one another. But without thoughtful design, which many of these processes, as Phil has shared, actually come from our Mennonite friends, our Mennonite colleagues, who really have spent decades working on circle process, or for those of you who are familiar with Parker Palmer, the Center for Courage and Renewal, it's absolutely based on circle process. So it isn't just that warm, familiar, well, we're sitting in a circle, so therefore we're doing circle process. You actually are doing these key pieces, which again, you get all these slides, where you really do have a clear sequence. It isn't just a random popcorning. There really is a trained circle facilitator, someone who has that sense of what is that centering question. A distinction being that trained facilitator is actually participating, as Phil lifted up for us. And that the part that I adore so much, and I loved it that he showed that photo, because I was with him when he did a beautiful, thoughtful, elegant laying out of creating the aesthetic in the room where it would feel like a spiritually hospitable space. Again, virtually, that's difficult to do, but we can do it with images where you actually have a flickering chalice or you have that centering bowl or something like that. But the key piece in that center are our values. We are a covenant-centered faith. So laying out and writing out beforehand, you could do that with your individually, you could take photographs of them, have each member, if this is a youth group circle, do a creative doodle of perhaps our principles, of our values, and you have photographs and you post them and you put that as your center. So remember, our values are the center. So I'm gonna open up a tiny little PowerPoint that I've worked on. Now, some of you all may have been with us for our regional assembly, where Phil and I also did a workshop on the circle process. So I've used some of those slides. So the application is endless. If you have a group that's historically been meeting at the congregation, to work perhaps on your AIM certification, your accessibility certification with the UUA, or perhaps you have a green sanctuary and you're thinking, well, what do we still have to talk about? Or you have a board meeting or your youth group or a covenant group. Your covenant circles all would be using these circle processes. My piece of this evening is begging you, pleading with you to think about this in a multi-generational context. So again, I mentioned, and this comes from my work specifically with Connie Goodbread in the Southern region, but it's actually across the nation. Many religious educators have this as an echoing refrain. The reason we're doing this and being thoughtful about it is because faith development is all that we do. Unitarian Universalism is the faith we teach. So when we talk about thoughtful ways to spiritually deepen our experience and our faith with one another, that is faith development, and we are teaching something in this process. And the congregation, or in this experience, our virtual connections, literally becomes our curriculum. So multi-generational ministry in an age of physical distancing. And I want to lift up, I think she's on the Zoom room tonight, Meredith Plummer. Wave, Meredith, if you're here. Meredith has absolutely offered up incredible resources at the COVID-19 Religious Professional Facebook page. And I just want to bless you and thank you for all of the incredible adaptive resources that you're creating, guides, and even virtual Easter egg hunt for Easter. Our congregation in Lexington, Kentucky did that. So I just wanted to name and honor you and thank you. But in terms of how we can make sure that generations and our congregations are still feeling connected, the isolation can be so paramount. And yes, many of you all, oh, okay, raising your hand, thanks, Meredith. So many of you all are having virtual worship services and having some multi-generational religious education time, and maybe some of you are even having virtual youth group sessions, but still think of a way perhaps to have a circle process where you just literally intentionally make sure that people of all ages are there to talk about any centering question. How is life going for you, or something like that? Of course, you would have those participants register beforehand. You would need to make sure the adults are checking in if you're a religious educator and you're organizing this. The background screening the awareness of who's signing up, all those pieces remain in place even for a virtual connection. We'll take a little sip of water. So you can read here on the slide, these small groups, which amazing meaning making happens in small groups. There is a beauty in small groups. And having these norms of how to do thoughtful circle process can make sure that they won't go off the beam, that literally everyone will be enhanced, will feel like they have been invited to participate, even if they pass on one go round or another, they have been invited to bring their. What are some of the elements to be considered in organizing these multi-generational small group circle processes? You want to make sure that you, again, as I mentioned, have a registration process. So say you have an 8th principle task force where you're really looking at dismantling white supremacy in your home congregation, and you want to make sure that there are voices being heard from across the age spectrum, from a 13-year-old to an 80-year-old. How powerful it would be if there was some sort of shared education beforehand, and then the meetup would be, how does this lay on my soul? What does this bring up for me? And having that focused on something like an 8th principle would be a marvelous way for there to be a deepening of consciousness raising around that. But again, you would need to register, make sure the folks registered, make sure that if you're using some of these dyads, sort of, that you're really thoughtful and making sure that there's some good equity, that you're moving it around, not matching up the same people the whole time, and making sure that the time and the setup are fully accessible. Those are some elements to consider. So now I want to go on. Some of you all, I think Teresa Putnam's online as well, amazing religious educator from Lansing, Michigan. We were at a Fall Loretta conference. I think this is now maybe 6 years ago, maybe 7. And the Blessed Sheila Shu, who some of you all who do Soul Matters know a lot of the work that Sheila has done, and also there are other sites that she works on, but she has been trained by Kate Pranis, who we consider sort of the mother guru, Mennonite, on circle process. And what Sheila did was she adapted the circle process for families. This is something that for those of you all who are religious professionals in your congregations, you can virtually give this technique and send out to your parents. Not to give them more homeschooling, because I'm hearing across the boards that parents are overwhelmed with the volume of homeschooling that they have been having to do. This is a really creative, sweet, tender way for families to connect and to thoughtfully talk through some of the challenges. What happens when we are literally all here all day, all of the time? What are the values that are important to making sure that we remain intact as a family? Are we truly exhibiting kindness? Are we still exhibiting consciousness about our environment, making sure we're still recycling even though we're not leaving the house, whatever that is? A part of the resources that you will have is that Sheila actually has a complete guide that you can send out to your families, including a sort of how-to and a guideline. But she gives examples of how she has done circle process in her own family for over a decade, where they've done things as simply talk about a dream for a vacation to really going into a deep conflict engagement conversation. The big piece, and again, this may feel intuitive that you really already have this figured out, but you need to set aside the time and place. Even if you're doing a family circle, there needs to be, we have a big old round oak table that's about 100 years old in my family, and that is a sacred spot in our family that we actually create almost like an altar type of design. I will put out a beautiful fabric when we need to have a really important family conversation. And at that table, because it is a circle, we are all equal. Even though I might be guiding the circle process in my family setting, I am not fixed on the outcome. I do not have an agenda going into a circle process where I want it to turn out a certain way. I want to be heard. I want to make sure everyone is heard, but you're not fixed on the outcome. This is a time for sharing. It's also, as this says right here, it's sometimes important that you feel as the circle keeper that you're not there to have that bow on the package at the end. You're not there to find that solution or that ultimate answer for the family. You're creating safe space. And even if you're, again, this is not necessarily on the family circle process, but if you're doing this virtually, it's important to remember that we still create safe space as well. But that circle keeper in the family model that Sheila Shu talks about, you are noticing the tone. You are noticing if there is time in between. You're encouraging maybe even moments of silence. You're thinking about a contemplative sort of environment, maybe some beautiful music playing. And you're making sure that you've actually maybe even had a prior conversation about what are your family values. When I was doing this more regularly when my son was younger, we had our family covenant up on the refrigerator, and that was sort of the centering piece. We already knew what our covenant was, and we had to make sure that we were lifting up what the values were from that covenant that were really resonating predominantly in our hearts. I'm just checking the time. Oh, we're doing pretty good. So especially for the youth that are here tonight, I want you to encourage, if you are here, I think you are here with your religious educator, Scott Stewart, but know that there is a model where you actually have circle processes that are already outlined. So it has the centering question, it has suggestions on readings, and all of them can be done virtually. This was created by Helen Zedewicki, as well as Gail Forsyth Vale has adapted this for use with children. These both can be used in multi-generational circles, but you don't have to create any of this. This is what you have to do, is to bring the wisdom from this evening of how to maintain an inherent whole, which is the circle process, and making sure that you're thinking about that as you're adapting any of these. All of these are available at the uua.org website. And I believe I'll be sending you the slides as well. So my last slide, and we want to open it up. I don't know, Phil, if we want to do questions or breakout groups, we can think about that in a moment. The reason we lift up this is a circle of hope. This is something I feel very strongly about. We are, as Unitarian Universalists, living an experiment in religious liberty, where we actually partner with people who are atheist, agnostic, pagan, Christian, Jewish. We have this beautiful garden of diversity because we feel it's so important that people are allowed to be on that individual journey of faith. But what's truly at our heart, it is not a creed, it is community. Community is our center. That is the piece that we have to learn how to bring all those diverse ideas, all that diversity of thought into an accord. And that accord is that we truly are trying to create beloved community in small ways. So if you can do it in a circle, it's a possibility we could do it out in the greater community. But when you're speaking in a circle, you're speaking to that heart of the community. You're not speaking to yourself. You're not just there to be heard with an urgency that I need to make I statement after I statement, even though many of you all who have done credo groups and other circle processes, it's important to make statements that are just about what you think. You're not stating something for the whole, but it's not just there with that urgency just to be heard. You're speaking to that love and that heart and that sense of hope that can be organically created in this holistic model of the circle. I could do a whole sermon on this, but I won't because we have a time limit. But remember, in this context, you know, even tonight we're throwing a lot of information at you. If we were doing a circle process together, we wouldn't try it with, 40 people or more. But it's the information and the knowledge comes from the participants. So you don't have to actually, dazzle each other with, I know this and I know that. It's from your experience, your narrative. Even if you're doing it, as I mentioned, with a purposeful, like for instance, like dismantling white supremacy, you actually have a purpose to the circle. You really do want to do thoughtful, spiritual, consciousness raising. So you're hoping that folks have done some reading, you're hoping that there's been some education beforehand. But that circle's not about, have you read White Fragility and here can you recite back to me, or have you read whatever it is. This circle is about, this is how this is laying on my heart. These are the thoughts coming up for me. This is what I'm observing, and this is how I'm feeling about it. And something is created in that mutual learning that is really quite beautiful. And I think all of this, to me, literally is lifespan faith development. I just had to put one more plug in for that. I've got a prompt for you all. So where do you think you have used circle process before? And I would like our youth to be responding for this. I want to give some room in this room. Where have you used something like this before? Anybody? Or
I,
speaking?
sorry, what was that?
Go ahead. Who are you?
Oh, I'm Molly Carney. I'm one of the youth from Elliott Unitarian Chapel in Missouri, and I have used circle process a little bit at Midwest Youth Leadership School. Whenever we would do credo groups whenever we would share in credo groups, we use circle process during that.
Thanks, Molly. And next summer, when we actually have our face-to-face, you'll be coming back, I believe, won't you? Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, you'll be leading the face-to-face, hopefully. Anybody else? Any youth? How else have you been a part of any kind of thing that felt like a circle process? Sherry has shared that she uses it at a writing retreat. Anybody else? Owen?
I'm Owen. I am from Elliott Chapel as well. I have used something similar to circle process at school where we use a Socratic circle. The difference is that there's not really a designated time for each person to talk. It's kind of encouraged that everyone gets to talk, but everyone can pretty much talk at any, we all sit in a circle and everyone can talk whenever they feel ready and we have a conversation about something. So yeah.
Cool. Socratic method. Get some reflection, Phil.
Yeah, and I just was thanks for bringing that up, Owen, because those are like two different structures, and you can move in and out of them. You know, in fact, we did that Tuesday, or when was it? Monday was our retreat, right? But yeah, we did some times when we would do the structured circle, and then we had other times when the conversation was open too. And that's one of the great things about, you know, mixing and matching these things. You can get a different kind of modality within the same meeting. So yeah, great.
Some more examples, and I'm looking at my dear religious educator colleagues who are here. We've been on retreats together where a part of the spiritual circle is using multiple intelligences. It's not just verbal. We have done Zentangles together to express ourselves. We have done doodling. We have done, you know, you name it. So the thing about circle process, and Phil, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it does supposed to, I think, have different modalities of learning. And that's a part of using the silence. It's a part of creating an aesthetic. Am I going too far afield here, Phil?
No. I mean, a song circle can be a circle process, and you could even have, you know, sharing songs, moving to your left, and the next person, you know, starts a song and things like that. So you're right. You can do, and certainly prayer circles, you know, things like that, where you would be perhaps using prayer beads and doing different elements around that. That could move around a circle as well. So there's lots of different ways you could do this. Yeah, and creative writing. I think somebody mentioned creative writing circles, you know, yeah, I think there's just limitless possibilities.
I see Gretchen and then Paula.
I started to get involved in women's spirituality circles in the mid-90s, and we did a lot of this, and I'm sure it came out of the 70s women's liberation movement.
Cakes for the Queen of Heaven. I mean, there's so much circle process in that. It's incredible. Paula, and would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Paula Christensen from the Unitarian Fellowship in Door County, Wisconsin. And I've gone through the training for the Zeidler Center for Public Discourse in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And one of the things they do, it's very structured, like we were talking about. But the one thing that I really liked is between the people talking, and there's actually a timer that times people, you know, for their 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But between people talking, we are coached at the beginning that we take 2 deep breaths. And so there isn't any sound, like you mentioned, you could use a gong or a bell or something, but they instead encourage you to take 2 deep breaths. And somehow that helped me to internalize what the person speaking had said. And so no one felt rushed, you know, to jump in. And actually the facilitator was the one that helped do the deep breaths very obviously, you know, to encourage other people to do them. So that was just another twist on what you were talking about with the pause. And I found that to be very, very meaningful.
You're giving your body a physical signal that something else is happening. You are actually taking, it's like hitting a pause button on something, you know, and actually filling yourself up with that oxygen and that possibility. That's beautifully expressed. Thank you, Paula. I'm also wondering, I think someone just had another question, so I'm not following the chat as I'm chatting myself.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat, and it's a good one too. It's from Ellen. It seems like Circle is greatly enhanced by having all participants have their video on so that the group has live face-to-face interaction. Yeah, actually, years ago, when I did something with the FOS Center at Meadville Lombard, and I looked into using online technology for groups. And I know people are talking about, you know, kind of people getting burned out with Zoom because it's kind of a difficult medium in some ways. Things like the lag time between the voice and when you see people's lips moving and things like that. And that stuff can be disconcerting, but the primary way ways we perceive emotion is through the tone of voice and the facial expressions. There's a lot more with the whole body, but yes, seeing each other, even though it's online, can give us a lot of clues about the emotional content that's going along with what people are saying. So yes, seeing each other face to face is very important, but also there's a accessibility thing, and this goes back to Jamie's question too, is you can do this like with somebody on the phone as well, if you need to. And so having photographs of the group so everybody can see at least a picture of each other at some point, so they can call that person to mind, even if we can't see them on video. I think that's important too, you know. But to acknowledge as well that there may be some people who just can't be there face to face, and they still can participate. But yes, the ideal circle is where we can see each other and be present for each other that way. And so, yeah, that's why I think this technology does work.
Even if you are a veteran, you have done a gazillion covenant circle groups or covenant groups. We invite you to consider that there's something about, like, for instance, I do a lot of youth ministry, and there's these beautiful articulations with youth who are deeply kind and very sensitive that everyone needs to be encouraged to share. So I'm an extrovert, I'm a chatty Cathy, I think out loud, I have to be very conscious. I'm one of those irritating people, I always put my hand up first, I just can't help myself. But the beauty of the circle process, I don't need to have any of that anxiety. I know exactly where I'm speaking. I know exactly who's speaking before me and who's speaking after me, and that anyone again can pass. So I don't have to have that sense, I need to be heard, I need to be heard, because you are there to understand. You're not there to be understood. Let me repeat that. You are there to understand. You're not there to be understood, even though The design is all about understanding. It's all about expressing ourselves, but you're there for deep, reflective listening, and you're providing your heart respite. You're providing a place to spiritually lay your concerns down, your burdens, as well as your joys. You're just affording yourself a time to go deep in community. Now I'm truly waxing on, but are there others with questions in our last, oh gosh, where did the time go? We've got about 5 minutes or so. Observations, questions, comments? And I can't see everybody. Yes, Scott Stewart, go ahead.
Nancy, do you have any experience using this model specifically in a youth group setting? And if yes, is there any takeaways that you would feel would be helpful for both myself and the youth I'm here with tonight to think about moving forward?
Yes, I have. Not necessarily with a congregational youth group, but with a diverse, and the importance is you don't have a de facto, you don't have a default person who's always the leader. This is a skill that everyone should share. So you should actually have a scheduled rotation where there is someone who is that circle keeper, and it's not just the extrovert, but it's someone who is prepared to make sure. You involve them beforehand with coming up with, especially if you're doing this virtually, and I haven't done this too often virtually, I've done it just a couple times with youth virtually, that creative piece of creating some beautiful values. Like someone has done a gorgeous little doodle of the word hope, or a lovely snapshot of their fuzzy dog and how it brings joy, and joy is written above the photo. So you would have these offering ups in the virtual space as a sort of photo gallery before you actually do it. So, or you could actually have someone showing the values, showing the photo as a sort of a review of the values that keep us centered. You have a structured with the youth that silence will be a part of it, which is sometimes a hard one even for me, to make sure that you have silence, thoughtful introduction, someone is already prepared. You're not scrambling to get an opening reading or a closing, you're already done it beforehand. And then you make the questions simple. You know me, Scott, I overthink this stuff. You need to make the questions simple. How are things with your heart these days? What's helping you cope if this is about the pandemic or whatever? And that if there is a covenant that has existed with that youth group before, that needs to be revisited to be applied to a virtual setting and thought about. And I want to lift up again, and I know, Scott, you've done it with many of your youth, know about aspirational covenants and all of the work that Jenica Davis Hockett has done on covenant building. But it's a resource for everybody. It's really multi-generational. And there's something quite different when you create a covenant for like a small group like this, which is a values-centered question on how do I live my UU values? How do I thoughtfully think about consumption? Am I actually living my values, and that's the beauty when you go through her guideline, which again will be in your resource. Did that help, Scott, a little bit? Okay. We have just 4 more minutes. Any other questions or observations? And I can't see everybody, so please just chime in if you would like. How about in the chat box? How many of you are actually doing circle or covenant groups right now? Because I know a lot of folks who registered, some of you had questions. I'm just curious. I'm just wondering if those are going on. I'll give you a moment to write in the chat. So Meredith says we are. The last ones are this June. And Meredith, would you unmute yourself for a second? Are you leading them all, or do you have some covenant people that are doing it with you?
We have facilitators, and about 5 of them, and I create their guides, but they facilitate their small groups.
Okay. So thanks, Meredith. I would encourage those of you who already have a set group of people who are members of covenant circles. And guess what I'm going to say? It's not going to surprise you. Think about a multi-generational one. Think about one that involves youth as well. They need time to check in right now. I mean, my gosh. Eau Claire has several chalice circles that are meeting online. Lovely. Anybody with a question or comment before we begin to close? And then Joetta is saying, besides covenant groups that are already going, when COVID hit, we created connection groups. How smart. Oh, that's so good. People do need time to check in with one another. In a large context, you need those big, you know, Sunday morning where you're seeing 100 faces to just seeing 6. And then Marie shared, and Marie, I think you're at St. John's in Cincinnati. We have a couple groups led by experienced facilitators. Wonderful. And here's a virtual challenge to you. So covenant circles, covenant groups always have a call to service, which actually I think any construct in a congregational setting, if we receive, we should contribute. And I think that covenant circles in a time of COVID and virtual time also need to find ways to be of service, whatever that is. Maybe doing some exploring about what are some agencies nearby that need some online donations. In particular, one thought that I had for my local home congregation, providing in areas that have very little Wi-Fi access. Maybe a covenant circle could sponsor a hotspot that's set up outside of a community center where there's published, it's very clear there's going to be Wi-Fi for this 3-block radius or whatever for this time, you know, that sort of thing. So covenant circles still need to find a way to be of service. So I see we just have a moment. We have 1 minute. So I think, and Phil, you may have some closing thoughts, but I just want to affirm, here you are taking time in an evening where you probably have had 3 or 4 Zoom meetings or something like that, finding ways to make sure that you and your community can still feed the Spirit. You can still feed and nourish that, which will help you literally navigate this time that can feel like maybe perhaps one challenge after another. The more that we find ways to connect and we do not let the obstacles stop us, that will make sure that we have a future together. So I'm hoping that you've gotten some good how-tos tonight, as well as some inspiration. Phil's, his Google site, you're just going to be blown away at how many things are there, and additional resources were both available to you. And Phil, do you want to say anything in closing?
Just that we'll send an email in the next day or so with links to the Google site and hopefully to the recording of this as well. So you'll be all set with those.
Thank you kindly, and many blessings. Take care, everyone. Good night.